Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the Honorable Alan Estevez, former Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security, to discuss export controls and their place in strategic competition in a conversation moderated by Martijn Rasser, Senior Director for Economy at SCSP.
Well, again, good afternoon. Delighted to welcome you to this fireside chat on export controls and strategic competition. We're incredibly fortunate to have with us today Alan Estevez, former Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security, and as head of BIS, he played a pivotal role in transforming export controls from a technical compliance issue into a central tool of U.S. national security and economic strategy. So Alan, welcome, and let's dive right in. First thing I wanted to talk to you about is, so you led BIS during a time when export controls were no longer just about dual-use lists. They became a headline issue in our strategic competition with China. How do you see the role of export controls evolving in that broader context of U.S. national security and technological leadership?
Thank you for that, Martin. First, thanks to CSP for having me here. How's my mic? Good? Because I can't hear it up here. Export controls have always been a tool to impede the adversary from developing capabilities that could threaten the United States and its allies. And obviously, that remains. The difference is that it used to be more about weapons of mass destruction versus artificial intelligence. Right. And if we're going to sit here in this conference, that's what we should be talking about. And I view artificial intelligence as actually has the same capacity and capability as a weapon of mass destruction as it evolves and as it could be used. So of course we should be impeding the adversary's use of our technology to obtain the tools that they need to make the best models. And of course from that spins off all sorts of other things, including in the biospace, the cyberspace, et cetera. So I would expect export controls to continue to be used as a strategic tool in our toolbox to hamper adversary development. Now, with that said, I think everyone needs to recognize export controls are not a permanent tool, right? They're a hurdle. Adversaries will figure out ways through their own technological capability to make the control that you put in place irrelevant, or to work around it through some other way. So you always have to be on your feet, going to the next step and the next step and the next step.
So artificial intelligence, biotech, quantum information science, these are rapidly developing technology areas. Breakthroughs are happening almost every day. Does the U.S. government have the right tool set at the moment to keep up with this rapid pace of innovation?
I'd be hard pressed to say that we're perfect at it. I think the tools are there. I think we could use, in my time as Undersecretary, and I'm sure Jeff Kessler is probably figuring out what he needs. I needed more capacity. I needed more tech expertise so that I could rapidly keep pace of where the technology was moving and try to stay ahead of that. But once we decided to act, we could actually put a rule out fairly quickly.
Great. Now, one of the big shifts under your leadership was the push for tighter coordination with allies, particularly around semiconductor tools, advanced computing. How successful has the United States been in aligning its export controls with key partners, such as the Netherlands, Japan, South Korea?
So I'm not going to talk about any specific partner. First of all, because our partners, very important in this business, are very concerned about retaliation from the PRC, and rightly so. And in certain cases, they just don't have the capability and capacity that the United States does to withstand some sort of retaliation. And of course, you're seeing that right now in the tariff wars, the type of retaliation that you can expect in the rare earth business right now. I'm trying to move this down so it doesn't get in my eye. So one, you got to work with them. Two, you do have to recognize the United States doesn't hold all the cards, right? We might have key parts of the manufacturing supply chain and certainly some of the finished products, but if it's made elsewhere, controlling it in the United States isn't solving the problem. So you have to work with your allies. Now we do have something called the Foreign Direct Product Rule, which we deployed at the start of the administration, probably deployed a little more reticently. We got more comfortable over time, and frankly, use of that had started in Trump 1. So I give those guys credit for that. But that only takes you so far too. So it's very important to work with your allies to find the right solution. What I found is when you put your energy and effort into it, like when I personally got involved in negotiating with our allies, we probably closed in 2-3 months what we needed to do in controls. And part of that was we started to share intelligence with our allies, and that was critical in getting them to understand the threats that we saw, so sharing that threat information, and then getting them to look with us at the technical tools that we needed to control in order to protect ourselves.
So once the intelligence sharing took place, you saw the light bulb go off, and the allies recognized, okay, the United States is accurate in its assessment of these threats?
I'd say it made it easier.
Yeah.
And they worked, my counterparts work with their counterparts in their own intel communities.
I see.
To get their own assessments based on our intel, which is the way it should work. I mean, we would look at the intel that we were given and do our own assessment of it.
Now, export controls often put the private sector in a tough position. They're caught between national security imperatives and the need to compete globally. How do you advise the current administration, BIS, how should they work with U.S. companies to manage that tension, and what role should industry play in shaping future export control policies?
It is a balance because you do want to sustain technological leadership in the United States in doing this. So we don't want to export control our way into being in backwater, right? And it's possible to do that. On the other hand, there are certain decisions you need to make where you say the risk here to the national security is so great that we're going to have to put a control, whether we did it unilaterally and then brought in allies or we work with them to do it up front. Now, in doing that, if I look at my travel pattern when I was the undersecretary for BIS, there was a bunch of global travel and there was a bunch of travel to Silicon Valley. And the reason I went to Silicon Valley a lot is because I thought it was important for me to get out and personally explain to companies why we were doing what we were doing, hear them out, and then try to get the right balance and control the right things so that I'm not just putting blanket controls on things that are meaningless. I'm controlling the highest end, controlling the things that worried us the most, especially if I look and say artificial intelligence is what I'm trying to impede. So like a low-end GPU or CPU is probably not what I need to protect. Chinese can make them anyway. So I'm looking at the highest end. It's important to work with companies on that, point one. Point two, industry needs a roadmap. Industry needs some understanding of where the direction of the United States government is going in its regulatory regime, and giving them some level of understanding of the direction we're heading lets them plan out their own spend and their own development, and where they're going to be able to sell and where they're not going to be able to sell. Now, they may not want to hear that, but it does give them that we've given them that information.
So let's look to the horizon. What emerging technologies do you think will most challenge the current export control system, and what reforms would you recommend the BIS consider to stay ahead of the curve?
I think we always touch base on the ones that jump to mind, including semiconductors and the next gen of semiconductors, the tools that make those semiconductors, I think, are always going to be critically important. The biotech space, if you were listening, Derek Schmidt was talking about biotech in his time on the commission, I think is critical in the future. The trick with biotech is that you can be doing things to make cures for cancer, cures for other debilitating diseases. Some of those same tools can be used for making personalized pathogens, if you would, or for state control type things. So there's good, there's bad, and it's hard to draw the line of where the good and where the bad is. Like anything we were doing was never trying to impede, let's say, PRC healthcare or Russian healthcare for that matter. On the other hand, we know that they have programs and we need to impede those programs. So you got to do, at least at the highest end, what you need to do on the research space.
So Alan, I had the honor of hosting you for the first public remarks that the administration made 2.5 years ago, right after the October 7 export controls were announced. Looking back, how successful do you believe they were?
I'm always reticent to grade myself, but I thought we did pretty well.
Okay.
I'll let others put a sign grade on it. I think if you look at the totality of the 3 October rules, which were really an October, November, and a December rule, plus some things we did in January in the last week, some of which are not in place anymore. I think in totality, those rules did a good job of putting up, as I was talking earlier, the type of speed bumps that are necessary to impede the PRC from moving ahead. Now, are they going to work around? Yes. Do they have really, really good engineers? Sure. Are they able to be fast followers? And that's what I'd say the DeepSeek example really shows. Absolutely. So, you can't rest on those laurels. You do have to stay ahead. But I think in changing the dynamic of how we do export controls and actually in impairing Chinese capability, I'd say we did pretty well. The other thing I want to talk about very briefly, and it's not really an export control issue, it's kind of the opposite, is standing up the ICTS, the Information Communication Technology Systems Program that we did during my time. It's critically important. I think that area is going to grow. The connected vehicle rule that we put out is also critically important to protecting U.S. national security.
Looking back, what would you do differently? Is there anything that you would have tweaked with the benefit of hindsight?
There's always things that we could have tweaked. I'd say the first October rule, we didn't quite get the parameters right. I wish I had dug in a little more as we were putting that together. The same people worked on the second parameter, but I spent a lot more time when we did the 23 rule on spending time with the industry and with key people who either design chips or use chips to understand how we could best do that parameter. I think, having come from the DoD, where the CEOs I tended to work with all have clearances, I think actually we should be getting clearances for our counterparts in Silicon Valley so that they can understand the threat as well. I think all those things would be helpful in the future. And then finally, it took me a while before I understood what the capacity of BIS was and what I needed to fill. So by the time we were pushing for increased resources related to increased IT, increased agents, increased technology capability, we were running out of time.
Yeah. So one final question for you. What advice do you have for Undersecretary Kessler as he embarks on a very important role in this administration and on the global stage? What's the one thing you'd urge him to prioritize during his tenure?
Two things. Actually, I'm going to give you two.
All right.
One, on the budget, which does a lot of bad things to other areas, actually has a plus up for BIS in it. So I'd advise Undersecretary Kessler to take advantage of that money, get some new tools, some new IT, look at some more shoe leather for agents in the field, and more capability in the export administration and the ICTS space. Point one. Point two, I'd say, again, giving ourselves credit on the protection side with regard to the PRC is keep the direction. You don't have to do exactly what we did, but I think it's important to keep that directoral focus.
Excellent. Alan?
And we hit our mark here.
Yeah, I know. It's
50
perfect
minutes.
timing. Yeah.
That's the fastest panel I've ever done.
Alan, thank you so much for being with us today. Would you please join me in thanking Alan Estevez? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin. Always a pleasure.